I'm just scraping my spatula along the bottom edge to honk my horn. I'm Erin McDowell, and we're making rainbow cakes to celebrate Pride, and I'm going to show you 2 ways to decorate them. I think it's easiest to prep the cake pans with a spray of nonstick spray. You could use butter or oil to grease. I just find that you get the thinnest, most even coating with nonstick spray. Knock that around until the whole pan is coated. I've got 3 pans here. We're making a 6-layer cake. This is basically a white cake recipe, and I wanted to use a white cake recipe so that the colors of the frosting would really pop out. Because it's a white cake recipe, I've also formulated the frosting so that the egg yolks are utilized in the frosting. I'm going to mix our egg whites until they get lightly frothy. If you don't do this, you'll find kind of little globs of egg. This is where you get your arm workout to justify eating a lot of cake later. So there's our dry ingredients and our wet ingredients. And now we're going to start mixing the batter. So this recipe uses both butter and oil, which helps make it a really moist, soft, tender cake. Just a little bit of sugar. So we're making a really big cake. You're gonna see a visible difference in the color. It's going to be closer to a white than a yellow color that it is now. Now I'm gonna start adding the dry ingredients and the wet ingredients, alternating between the 2. You can just sort of start it in a couple quick bursts like this, and that helps it get incorporated without fear of getting a flour shower. So now with the mixer running, add some of my milk and egg mixture. Also scrape down the bowl halfway between adding the additions, and that just helps make sure that you don't have like a pocket at the bottom. You really want the batter to be evenly mixed. Ooh, I really want to eat cake. Still have a little ways to go. Now we're going to divide it as evenly as we can into 3 cake pans. We'll use an ice cream scoop to help guide you. I'm going to go ahead and start by dropping 3 scoops into each pan. It is sort of important that the cakes themselves are even, because it'll be a lot harder to divide them into 2 even pieces if one layer is much thinner than the others. My pastry chefs in school used to say, scrape like it's your Christmas bonus. We want all of that cake batter in there. That could be 35 cents in the bottom of the mixing bowl. The last thing we need to do is just sort of level this off in the pan, and the easiest way to do it with this cake batter is actually just to roll it around and then give it a shake. If you bang it, we could get rid of some of that beautiful aeration that we added with the creaming, because this is a pretty liquid batter, so it settles pretty easily. And they're ready to bake. Our frosting for this cake is a little different than some frostings you might have made before. It actually starts by making a custard or a pudding. It's also known as a German-style buttercream. So it's 2 cups of milk, whole milk. This is not a time to be using skim or 1%. Just kidding. You absolutely could use those if you want, but it's gonna taste so much better if you use whole. Just about 1/3 of the sugar we're gonna add into the milk. This keeps the milk from scalding when it comes to a simmer. Then the rest of the sugar is gonna go into this bowl with some cornstarch. And we're gonna whisk those together. The reason that I like to do this is because the granules of the sugar help break up the cornstarch and disperse it, which will help the cornstarch from getting clumpy. We use the egg whites to make the cake, and now we're gonna use up these egg yolks. You don't wanna add this too far in advance of when you're making it, because sugar is actually hygroscopic and it can suck moisture out of things. When it sucks moisture out of egg yolks, it can make the egg yolks clumpy, so you wanna do this right before you're ready to get started. To the stove. So I'm bringing the milk to a simmer, and I'm going to add a small amount of it to our egg yolk mixture. And this is called tempering the mixture. And then we're gonna return it to the pan. I'm gonna add this in a slow, steady stream. I like to whisk it for the majority of the beginning of the cooking process, just because if it does clump up, the whisk will help us take care of any clumps. And basically what we're looking for here is for the custard to visibly thicken up, and then it's actually got to come to a boil. Bubbles have to break out of the top of this. And that's for a really specific scientific reason that I should or shouldn't say. You can edit this out of the video, but it is interesting. So eggs have an enzyme in them that consumes starch. And because we used cornstarch in this recipe, it's really important that you bring the mixture to a boil. Otherwise, that enzyme is still alive. So what happens is you can cook your custard and it can be perfectly thick and smooth. And then you can put it in the fridge to cool. And when you come back to it later, it'll be thin and gloopy. And that's because if you didn't bring it to a boil, that enzyme ate all the starch that was inside your recipe and made it thin again. But if you bring it to a boil, you kill that enzyme and you'll end up with a custard that stays thick. Eggs are like seriously amazing. They call this first boil in the custard world. Can't be little bubbles around the edge. It has to be big bubbles sort of from the center. Ooh, like that one. I'm going to strain this custard, which just gets rid of any kind of clumps that you might have. Cover the surface directly with plastic wrap, just so the custard doesn't form a skin as it cools. Then you can also use a damp paper towel. Now that our custard has chilled fully, it's time to make our frosting. This is a really funny frosting because there'll be several times while you're mixing it where you'll think, that doesn't look right, that doesn't look right. And you just have to keep on mixing it and it will all come together, I promise you. And it's actually quite a fascinating show to watch. Start adding the butter, about a tablespoon at a time, but no need to be super precise. And because the butter is room temperature and this mixture is a little on the cooler side, it's going to take a little while for the butter to actually break down and emulsify and become part of the frosting. It's impossible to ignore the 8 sticks of butter that are standing here. But for me, celebration means at least 8 sticks of butter. In the mixer right now, you'll actually even see some clumps of butter. And this might be one of the times where you think, uh-oh, this isn't quite right. It'll all come together. And one of the reasons that we don't bring this custard to room temperature is the act of mixing it this much will aerate the frosting and make it really light and fluffy. Right now, it sort of looks like scrambled eggs. It's not. It's just not fully come together yet. Just keep whipping until it comes together. It's still a very firm frosting, but it's soft. It's lightened in color. You can see the consistency is very smooth and creamy. I've got my beautiful frosting and now I'm gonna divvy it up to make all my rainbow colors. I use my handy ice cream scoop again for this because this is a 1/4 cup size scoop. I need 1 1/4 cup of each color of frosting. So I'm using a gel food coloring here. I'll be able to add less food coloring to get a stronger, bolder color. You can use the typical liquid-based food coloring. You won't get as vibrant of a color because you'll have to add a lot and that liquid will continue to water down your frosting a little bit. And then the other thing to know about gel colors is they do get a little more vibrant as they sit. So if you think it's almost there, but not quite, you may want to let it hang out for a little bit rather than adding more. There's our red. Now I'm gonna dye the rest of the colors. Our cakes are totally cool, and I'm going to take each one of these and divide it carefully in half so that I end up with 6 layers of cake. When I'm dividing a cake like this, I like to take a long serrated knife and basically make a score line halfway around the whole cake. And I don't cut all the way through yet, and part of the reason is that if I do mess up and I realize it's not quite half, I can fix it when I go back around. I haven't made the decision to cut the whole cake yet. And then when you're ready to actually cut, you just follow that score mark and you start cutting in deeper and deeper. I'm using a cake turntable, but you could also just use a plate, and I'm just gonna keep cutting in until I know that I've cut all the way across. What you don't wanna do is sort of a sawing motion like this. That's what's gonna make a really uneven layer. But like this, so one of my first and best cake decorating tips is to start with the bottom of a cake layer as the first layer. We are going to scoop about 1/3 of the frosting into each layer and start spreading it into an even layer. Now it doesn't look like a ton of frosting, but it is going to fully cover this layer, and it's also going to make sure that when we slice the cake, we have really nice, beautiful, thin layers of both cake and frosting. It looks really, really good. And we just want to go all the way to the edges, smoothing it around, and then I like to hold it flat with the center in the center of the cake and kind of press evenly, and that just gives it one more kind of smooth out and pushes the excess frosting to the edges of the cake, which will be useful later. So now I'm going to put another cake layer on. So when I even out the frosting and you see that some comes to the edge, that's a good thing. We're actually going to use some of that as our crumb coat before we fully frost the cake. Then for the final layer, I like to end with the bottom of a cake layer, and I put it flat side up. And that just helps ensure that you have a nice flat top for your cake. Press flat against the cake to smooth out all that excess frosting and sort of start the process of giving the cake a little bit of a crumb coat. Ooh, look how our spatula looks. Refrigerate the cake for a little while to help it set, firm up, make it easier to frost, and then we'll come back and finish decorating it. All right. So our cake is nice and chilled now, which just means it'll be a little bit easier for us to frost. And I'm gonna go ahead and put the majority of the purple frosting on top, just saving a little bit in case I need it to accentuate. As you can see by the layers on the inside, we're gonna frost the outside sort of similarly and make sort of an ombre effect where the colors sort of blur together. This is a nice technique for all different levels of cake decorating ability because it looks pretty cool even if you sort of mess it up. And then even it out. And again, the excess is gonna go over the sides, that's good. I'm gonna add a little blue frosting to this rim here. And I'm using a smaller spatula for this, just because it gives me a little more control. You'll find with this technique that it looking a little random and different actually makes it look better, which is one of the reasons why it can be really great still for beginners. There's no wrong way to ombre. I'm just gonna go ahead and flatten this one out just a little bit. So there's lots of different ways that you can frost a cake, but in this case I like to start with the top just because to get that ombre effect around the outer edge of this top edge of the cake can be a little tricky. And I've got kind of a nice head start onto that tricky part there. So now using my small spatula, I'm basically just gonna follow the colors that I see in the exposed sides here and just do about 1 inch of frosting all the way around. You don't really need that much for this effect. Whatever frosting you have left, it will be enough to frost the sides of this cake. Now I'm gonna do the orange. And I'm not even gonna wipe off my spatula because I can kind of start that effect already right from the get-go of combining the colors. Right now it's just about getting the frosting in the right spots. So the key to getting really smooth frosting is to have the frosting at the proper consistency. And for me, the magic consistency is the texture of mayonnaise. Having a frosting that is soft like mayonnaise will ensure that it gets smoother, easier, and we'll be able to smooth it with less passes of the spatula. To smooth the cake, what we want to do is we want to take a long utensil like this offset spatula, and I'm going to hold it flush to the edge of the frosting, and then I'm going to rotate my turntable. If you were using a plate, you would rotate the plate while you're working. Ah! Before I smooth it again, I'm just going to add a little bit of extra red because I feel like some of my red is getting lost. You can really smooth as many times as you need to get the look that you're wanting, but eventually you'll kind of hit cake. When you have a little pocket like this, that just means you don't have quite enough frosting there. So I'm just gonna use my small spatula to kind of remedy that, put a couple little dollops in these spots. Our cake is chilled. So the first thing I do is I run my spatula just along the edge here just to sort of make sure that the cake is released and not attached with any frosting to the turntable. And then I kind of inch the spatula as far underneath as I can and slide my hand underneath. And just like that, that's how easy it is to transfer a cake to a cake stand. It's a little bit about confidence and making sure your cake is nice and chilled. Now I want to show you another fun way to decorate the cake. Piping tips are something that really scare a lot of people. I just say embrace the randomness. When you're piping, it's a little bit easier to go ahead and just do the piping right on the cake stand. And then you don't have to worry about moving it later. I've put my frosting into piping bags with all different kinds of tips. And you do need an extra half batch of frosting to do this piping technique because the piping can sometimes take a little more frosting than that smooth ombre technique. So in this case, what you want to do is you want to hold the piping tip perpendicular to the cake. And you just want to apply gentle pressure. And when you're ready for the shape to stop, you stop applying pressure and then you pull away. I'm just gonna keep piping, alternating my colors, and I'm trying to get up to blue at the top. For this one, I'm actually gonna move it in a little bit of a circle and make a rosette shape. And I just love the texture that the piping tips give to the cake, to the frosting, and it makes the rainbow effect really pop. Even if you mess up, you have no idea that that one looks a little different than that one. I frosted this entire cake in less than 5 minutes. Just squeezing little shapes with icing around as I went along. And it looks so cool. So it's a nice thing to do that seems hard, but you don't need to tell anyone how easy it actually was. This cake slices super easily, and the only thing you want to do is wipe off your knife on a wet towel in between slices just so you don't muddy the colors. My favorite bite is when I get some of all of the colors and I make a rainbow bite. That's crazy good.
What does the rainbow bite taste like?
Cake?
Is it like a clock?
Oh, right! He set me up for that. I was like, God, I just said it's so good, right? Okay. It tastes like a quality.